Greetings friends. Thanks for stopping by for a visit. If you enjoy the video, please subscribe.
I work as a tour guide for the National Park Service at Gettysburg, and there are things I don't talk about on tours. Not because I'm not allowed to, because once you say certain things out loud here, it feels like the place notices. That might sound dramatic, but if you spend enough time on this battlefield, you stop laughing at that idea pretty quickly. I was hired to teach history. Dates, maps, troop movements, casualty numbers. I'm not out there telling people about ghosts, and I'm definitely not the guy in the lantern photos trying to scare tourists. Still, Gettysburg isn't quiet in the normal sense. Even on slow days, even in the middle of the afternoon, it feels occupied. Like something's still running in the background. I wouldn't call myself a hardcore believer, but I'm also not dumb enough to ignore patterns. When the same kinds of things keep happening to different people in the same places, you at least take note. Most reports have explanations. Some of them don't need explanations so much as acknowledgement. There are 3 experiences from this job I don't bring up with visitors. 2 happened to me. One happened to a coworker named Todd, who told me because he looked genuinely freaked out and needed someone to hear it. I'm posting this now because I'm realizing Gettysburg doesn't really care what you believe. It just cares that you were there. The first time something happened, I didn't even register it as paranormal. That's important. It didn't feel spooky. It felt inconvenient. I was out early, before the first tours of the day, doing a quick walkthrough of one of my usual stops near a tree line that borders an open field. If you've been to Gettysburg, you know the kind of place, deceptively calm, a little too pretty in the morning light. Dew on the grass, fog hanging low, but not thick enough to be dramatic. Just quiet. Then I heard cannon fire. Not loud enough to rattle your chest, but distinct. A low, concussive thud, followed by a rolling echo that felt like it came from the ground instead of the sky. I stopped walking without really thinking about it, like my body reacted before my brain did. A second later, I heard it again. Then musket fire. Not 1 or 2 cracks, but a scattered, uneven rhythm, like someone fumbling through a volley. My first thought was reenactors. My second was that reenactors are never that quiet about setting up, and definitely not at 7:15 in the morning. I stood there for maybe a full minute, just listening. The sounds weren't getting closer or farther away. They weren't moving at all. It was like someone had turned on a speaker somewhere out in the field and forgotten about it. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. No fade out. No echo trailing off. Just silence. I remember laughing under my breath and saying something like, "Okay, sure," to nobody. I pulled out my phone and checked the park schedule. Nothing. No events. No demonstrations. No alerts from other guides. I radioed it anyway. Everyone else was hearing birds and traffic. I walked closer to where the sound should have been coming from, half expecting it to start again. It didn't. The fog thinned, the sun came up another inch, and the place went back to being a normal field that people picnic in without thinking about it. I didn't tell anyone that day. I filed it under weird acoustics and moved on. But what stuck with me wasn't the sound itself, it was how indifferent it felt. Like it didn't need me there. Like it would have happened whether I was listening or not. That's when I started to wonder if some parts of Gettysburg aren't haunted so much as on a loop, just doing what they've always done, waiting for whoever happens to pass through. The second incident was harder to shrug off, mostly because it involved someone who looked right back at me. This happened in the late afternoon, during one of my last stops of the day near Devil's Denver. The tour group had already started drifting, phones out, kids climbing rocks, the usual end-of-tour energy. I was answering a question for a couple who hung back when I noticed a man standing a little off the path, near the boulders. At first, I assumed he was a reenactor who'd wandered away from wherever he was supposed to be. He was dressed in a dark jacket and trousers that looked wrong in a way I couldn't immediately place. Not costume wrong. Time wrong. He wasn't wearing a hat, and he didn't have a phone or camera, which honestly stood out more than the clothes. He watched me talk for a moment, then stepped closer and asked, "Is this where they tried to turn us?" The wording threw me. Not them. Us. I asked him to clarify, thinking maybe he meant one of the regiments I'd just mentioned. He nodded, like I confirmed something he already knew, and glanced back toward the rocks. Up close, I noticed his boots were scuffed down to the leather, and his feet were bare inside them. No socks. His voice was calm, almost casual, but his eyes kept moving, like he was tracking something I couldn't see. I told him yes, that this was one of the points where the line collapsed. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding that breath for a long time, and said, "We didn't think they'd come from there." Then one of the kids in my group shouted my name. I turned for maybe 2 seconds to tell them to stay on the path. When I looked back, the man was gone. Not walking away. Not blending into the crowd. Just gone. There was nowhere he could have gone without passing me, and the rocks around us didn't offer many hiding spots unless you knew them well. I asked the group if anyone had seen where he went. No one had noticed him at all. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the spot where he'd been standing, trying to replay the conversation and find something off enough to dismiss it. The clothes, the phrasing, the bare feet. None of it fit, but none of it felt theatrical either. What stuck with me most was the way he'd spoken. Not like he was reenacting history. Like he was checking his bearings. Like he'd gotten turned around. And for a moment, I was the closest thing he had to someone who knew where he was. Todd didn't tell me his story right away. That should probably be the first thing I say about it. Todd was the kind of guy who rolled his eyes whenever visitors asked about ghosts. Mid-30s, ex-Army, permanently exhausted, always volunteered for the late shifts because it meant fewer people. If something weird happened on the job, Todd's instinct was to make a joke and move on. So when he asked if I wanted to grab a beer after work and then sat there staring into his glass for 10 minutes without talking, I knew something had cracked. When he finally started, he told me this had happened a few weeks earlier during an evening shift where he'd been assigned to help close up one of the historic buildings that stays open later for special programs. I won't name which one. He was alone, or at least he thought he was. He said the night had been normal until it wasn't. No noises, no shadows, nothing dramatic. Just that creeping sense you get when you realize you've been moving on autopilot for a while. He checked his watch and noticed he was behind schedule, which didn't make sense. He was sure he'd only been inside for a few minutes. That's when he heard a child laughing. Not echoing, not distant, right behind him. Todd said his first reaction wasn't fear, just irritation. Kids sneak into places they're not supposed to be all the time. He turned around ready to do his, "Hey, this area is closed," speech. No one was there. The laugh came again, closer this time, followed by a voice that said, very clearly, "You're late." Todd laughed when he told me this part, but it wasn't a happy laugh. He said it sounded like a kid repeating something they'd been told, not threatening, not playful. Just stating a fact. He told the voice he was the one who decided what late meant, because that's the kind of thing Todd says when he's uncomfortable. The next thing he remembered was standing outside the building, door locked, keys in his hand, radio buzzing with someone asking where he'd been. According to the timestamp on his radio, 43 minutes had passed. Todd insisted he hadn't blacked out. No dizziness. No confusion. He knew exactly who he was, where he worked, what day it was. It just felt like someone had hit fast forward on his body while his mind lagged behind. The part he struggled with most came later that night at home. He woke up around 3 a.m. with a headache and the overwhelming feeling that he'd forgotten something important. When he went to the bathroom, he noticed mud on his boots. Not unusual by itself, except he hadn't been anywhere muddy, and the mud was pressed into the grooves like he'd been standing still for a long time. Then he saw the mark on his wrist. It wasn't a bruise exactly, more like a faint handprint, too small to be an adult's, wrapped just tight enough to leave an impression. It was gone by morning. Todd took pictures anyway. He told me he started having dreams after that. Not nightmares, routines. Standing in line. Waiting. Being told to hurry up. He said the worst part wasn't the imagery, it was the feeling that the dreams weren't about him. That he was borrowing someone else's impatience. Todd stopped volunteering for evening shifts after that. He avoided that building entirely. When I asked him what he thought happened, he shook his head and said, "I don't think it wanted to scare me." That was the line that stuck with me. He said, "It felt like it needed me to do something. Like I was in the way, or filling in for somebody who didn't show up." He finished his beer, paid the tab, and told me not to put this on Reddit. I waited a long time before breaking that promise. Because here's the thing, Todd didn't come back different in a dramatic way. He just seemed quieter, more careful about where he stood. Like someone who'd learned that time doesn't always move evenly in certain places, and that sometimes, without meaning to, you can step into a gap where something else is still waiting its turn.
Thanks for watching. If you want to hear more stories like these, please like and subscribe.